She notices it first on a Tuesday afternoon while they're sitting in the living room together, supposedly having quality time but really just existing in the same space while both scrolling on their phones. She glances over at him and watches as he methodically goes through his phone, deleting messages from his messaging app. Not just a few messages, he's going through and deleting entire conversations, clearing chat histories, wiping his phone clean like he's destroying evidence at a crime scene. She watches for a few minutes, trying to figure out what she's seeing, trying to rationalize what could possibly warrant such thorough deletion of messages. At first, she tells herself that maybe he's just trying to free up space on his phone, that maybe his storage is full and he needs to clear things out to make room for photos or apps or updates. That's a perfectly reasonable explanation, and she tries to hold on to it like a lifeline. But something about the deliberate way he's doing it doesn't sit right with her. There's a purpose to his deletions, a systematicity that suggests he's not just clearing out old junk, he's destroying something specific. She watches as he pauses between deletions, as if reading through messages before permanently removing them from his phone. She wonders what messages could be so important that he needs to read them one more time before erasing them forever. She decides not to say anything in that moment, doesn't want to seem paranoid or accusatory. Instead, she files away the observation in the back of her mind, adding it to the growing list of things about her husband that have been feeling off lately. She's noticed that he's been more withdrawn, that he's been spending more time on his phone, that he's been less engaged in their conversations, and less present when they're together. She's noticed that he's been working late more often, that he's been going to the gym more frequently than he used to, that he's been more careful about his appearance in general. She's noticed all these little things that individually might not mean anything, but together paint a picture of someone who's pulling away. The next day, she catches him doing it again. They're in the car on the way to dinner, and she glances over and sees him going through his phone, deleting messages with the same methodical precision as yesterday. This time, she counts. He deletes at least 20 conversations in the span of 10 minutes. 20 different conversations, gone, erased, permanently deleted from his phone as if they never existed. She feels a chill run down her spine as she realizes that this isn't a one-time thing. This is a pattern. This is something he's doing deliberately and regularly, which means there's something he doesn't want her to see. She wants to ask him about it, wants to say something in that moment, but they're in the car and she doesn't want to start an argument while he's driving. She doesn't want to accuse him of something when she doesn't have all the facts. She doesn't want to seem crazy or paranoid. So she stays silent, watching him out of the corner of her eye as he continues his systematic deletion of messages. She wonders who he's been talking to, what conversations are so sensitive that they need to be completely erased. She wonders if this is about another woman, if he's been having inappropriate conversations with someone else, if this is the digital equivalent of him covering his tracks. That night, she can't sleep. She lies awake next to him, listening to him breathe, trying to figure out what's happening. She thinks about all the ways her husband could be betraying her, all the reasons he might need to delete his messages. She thinks about the other woman's scenario. Is there someone at his work he's been flirting with? Is there an ex-girlfriend who's reached out to him? Is there someone he met at the gym or through friends who he's been talking to in ways he doesn't want her to see? Her mind spirals through scenario after scenario, each one more painful than the last. She decides that she needs to know what's on his phone, needs to see what conversations he's been deleting. She knows it's a violation of his privacy, knows it's crossing a line that most people would consider unacceptable, but the not knowing is eating her alive. She waits until he's in the shower the next morning and takes his phone from the nightstand. She tries the standard passcodes, their anniversary, their wedding date, his birthday, but none of them work. The phone is locked, protected behind a security code that she doesn't know, which feels like confirmation that he's hiding something important. She tries a few more combinations, getting increasingly desperate. She tries the date they moved into their house, the date they got their dog, random numbers that might be significant to him. Nothing works. She can feel her heart pounding in her chest as she realizes that his phone is completely locked down, that there's no way she can access it without his permission or his passcode. She puts the phone back quickly, feeling guilty and violated by her own actions, but also more certain than ever that he's hiding something significant from her. Over the next week, she becomes obsessed with the message deletion pattern. She starts paying close attention to when he does it, how often he does it, what time of day it happens. She notices that he usually deletes messages in the evening, right after dinner, or before bed. She notices that sometimes he spends 20 minutes going through and deleting, and sometimes he just does a quick purge. She notices that whenever she walks into the room, he quickly closes his messaging app like he's been caught doing something wrong. She notices that his phone is always with him now, always in his pocket or his hand, like he's afraid she's going to grab it and look through it. She decides to confront him, decides that she needs to ask him directly what's going on. She chooses a time when they're sitting down together at dinner, when they're not distracted by work or screens or other obligations. She tells him that she's noticed he's been deleting his messages every day, and she asks him why. She watches his face carefully, looking for any micro-expressions that might reveal guilt or fear or dishonesty. She watches as his jaw tightens, as his shoulders tense up, as he clearly struggles with how to respond to her question. He asks her what she means, playing dumb, asking her why she would be paying attention to what he's doing on his phone. She tells him that she's noticed the pattern, that she's seen him systematically deleting entire conversations, that it's been happening every single day for the past week. She tells him that it's making her suspicious, that it's making her wonder what he's hiding, that it's making her question whether their marriage is as solid as she thought it was. She watches as he shifts uncomfortably in his chair, as he avoids making direct eye contact with her. He tells her that it's nothing, that he's just trying to keep his phone clean, that he doesn't like having a cluttered message history. But his voice sounds hollow, and his explanation rings false. She knows him well enough to know when he's lying, and this is definitely a lie. His words don't match his body language, don't match the energy in the room, don't match the significance of the pattern she's been observing. She presses him harder, asking him who he's been talking to, asking him why those specific conversations need to be deleted, asking him if there's something about his communications that he doesn't want her to know about. He stands up from the table, clearly agitated, and tells her that she's being paranoid and controlling, that she has no right to monitor what he does on his phone, that if she doesn't trust him, maybe they have bigger problems than she thinks. He tells her that he needs some space, that he's going to go for a walk to clear his head. He grabs his jacket and his phone and leaves the house, leaving her sitting at the dinner table with her food getting cold and her heart breaking in real time. She watches him leave, feeling hurt and confused and angry all at once. She decides that she can't just sit around waiting for him to come back and hoping he'll eventually be honest with her. She decides that she needs to take action, needs to find out what he's hiding. She pulls out her laptop and starts doing some research on how to spy on someone's phone, on how to see deleted messages, on how to track someone's activity. She finds a few options: apps that claim they can recover deleted messages, services that claim they can access someone's phone remotely, hacking tools that claim they can bypass security codes. Most of them look suspicious or illegal, and she's not willing to go that far, not willing to compromise her own integrity in the process of trying to catch him in whatever he's doing. Instead, she decides to try a different approach. She decides to follow him, to see where he goes during his day, to see if he meets up with anyone, to see if she can piece together what's happening in his life that he feels the need to keep so secret from her. She takes a personal day from work and waits for him to leave for his usual routine. She follows his car to his office building, and she watches as he goes inside for his typical workday. She waits outside, watching the building entrance, waiting to see if he leaves at any point during the day. Around noon, she sees him emerge from the building, and he's not alone. He's walking with another man, someone she's never seen before, someone who appears to be around their age. They walk together to a nearby coffee shop, and she parks her car across the street and watches them through the window. They sit down at a table, and the other man pulls out a folder of documents. Her husband looks through the documents with serious concentration, occasionally pointing at something or asking a question. She tries to figure out what they're discussing, tries to read their lips, tries to understand what could possibly be happening in this clandestine meeting. The meeting lasts for about 45 minutes, and then the two men stand up, shake hands, and the other man leaves. Her husband sits at the coffee shop alone for a few more minutes, looking at his phone, and then he gets up and heads back to the office building. She sits in her car feeling confused because this doesn't look like an affair situation. This doesn't look like he's meeting with another woman. This looks like it could be a business meeting, but why would he need to delete his messages about it? Why would he need to be so secretive? She follows him back to the office building and waits. She sits in her car for the rest of the afternoon, not going back to work, just waiting to see what happens next. When he emerges at the end of the workday, he heads straight home like always, and she follows him, pulling into the driveway a few minutes after he does. When she goes inside, she finds him sitting on the couch looking stressed and worried. She asks him how his day was, and he tells her it was fine, that work was busy, that there's nothing new to report. She decides in that moment that she's done playing games, that she's done trying to figure this out on her own, that she needs to force him to tell her the truth. She tells him that she followed him today, that she saw him meeting with another man at a coffee shop, that she saw him looking at documents. She watches as his face goes completely pale, as panic flashes across his features. He stands up from the couch quickly, and she can see that he's struggling with what to say, struggling with how to respond to the fact that she's been following him. He tells her that she shouldn't have done that she had no right to follow him, that she's violated his privacy and his trust. She tells him that he violated their trust first by keeping secrets and deleting messages and meeting with people in secret. She tells him that she deserves to know what's going on, that she's his wife and she has the right to know what's happening in his life. She tells him that if he won't tell her voluntarily, she's going to keep investigating until she figures it out herself. She watches as he sits back down on the couch, and she can see something breaking in him, like he's reached a breaking point and he can't keep whatever the secret is locked inside anymore. He takes a deep breath and tells her that he needs to tell her something, that he's been keeping this secret for months, that he's been terrified of how she would react if she found out. He tells her that the man he was meeting with is named James, that James is a lawyer, that they've been discussing something very serious and very personal. He tells her that the reason he's been deleting his messages is because he doesn't want her to find out through information leaked or discovered accidentally. He wants to tell her himself, but he's been struggling with how to do it, and when the right time would be. She can see the fear in his eyes, can feel the trembling in his hands, can sense that he's about to tell her something that will change everything between them. She takes his hand and tells him that whatever it is, they can face it together, that she's here for him, that nothing will make her stop loving him. She watches as he struggles with how to begin, as he opens his mouth and closes it multiple times, as he clearly gathers every ounce of courage he possesses to finally speak the truth that he's been carrying alone. She sits down slowly on the couch, her mind racing through possibilities. She asks him what a lawyer would need to discuss with him that would require this level of secrecy. She asks him if he's in legal trouble, if he's done something wrong, if this is about money or taxes or something criminal. He tells her no, that he's not in trouble with the law, that this isn't about anything he's done wrong. He tells her that it's about something his father did, something from before she even knew him, something that's only recently come to light. He takes another deep breath and tells her that when he was 12 years old, his father sexually abused him. He tells her that it happened over a period of several years and that nobody in his family knew about it. He tells her that he never told anyone because he was ashamed, because he thought it was his fault somehow, because he was terrified of what would happen to his family if anyone found out. He tells her that he only recently started to process what happened to him, that the memories have been coming back more frequently, that he's been having nightmares and panic attacks and intrusive thoughts. She feels like all the air has been knocked out of her lungs. She's not sure what she was expecting him to say, but it wasn't this. It wasn't sexual abuse. It wasn't trauma. It wasn't the revelation that her husband is a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. She sits in silence for a long moment, trying to process what he's just told her, trying to understand what this means, trying to figure out how to respond to something this significant. He continues talking, telling her that he reached out to a therapist a few months ago, that he's been in therapy specifically to process his trauma. He tells her that the therapist recommended he get legal advice about whether there's any possibility of pressing charges, even though so much time has passed. He tells her that James is helping him understand his legal options, helping him figure out whether his father could still face consequences for what he did. He tells her that he's been meeting with James secretly because he wasn't sure if anything would come of it, and he didn't want to put her through the stress and trauma of knowing about his abuse if there was nothing concrete to tell her. She feels a wave of emotions crash over her, sadness for what her husband experienced, anger at his father for what he did, guilt that she didn't know that her husband was suffering, confusion about why he felt he had to keep this from her, and overwhelming love for him and what he's trying to do now. She reaches over and takes his hand, and she feels him tense up for a moment before he relaxes and squeezes her hand back. She tells him that she's so sorry that he went through that she can't believe he's been carrying this alone, that she wishes he had trusted her enough to tell her sooner. He tells her that he was ashamed, that he felt like if she knew about the abuse, she would see him differently, that she would think he was damaged or broken or weak. She tells him that nothing could be further from the truth, that knowing what he survived makes her love him more, not less, that she sees his strength and his courage in the fact that he's addressing this now instead of continuing to let it destroy him from the inside out. She tells him that she wants to support him through this process, that she wants to be part of his healing, that she's angry at his father and she wants justice for what he did. He breaks down and cries for the first time, really cries, letting out months' worth of pain and fear and shame that he's been holding inside. She holds him while he cries, doesn't say anything, just lets him feel what he needs to feel. She realizes that his message deletion wasn't about infidelity or betrayal. It was about him trying to protect his secret, trying to keep his trauma private, trying to manage something so overwhelming that he couldn't figure out how to tell her. She realizes that his withdrawal and distance have been symptoms of his trauma, signs that he's been struggling with something much deeper than relationship issues. Over the following weeks, she learns more about his childhood trauma and how it's affected his adult life. He tells her about the dissociation he experiences, about the way certain smells or sounds can trigger panic attacks, about the ways he's developed coping mechanisms that have both helped and hurt him over the years. He tells her about the times he's engaged in risky behaviors trying to numb the pain, about the ways he's pushed people away, about the shame and guilt he's carried for decades. He tells her that he's been terrified that if anyone found out, they would judge him or blame him or pity him, and he couldn't bear any of those responses. She listens to all of this with compassion and without judgment, realizing that her husband has been a survivor his entire adult life, that he's been managing trauma while trying to be a good partner and a good person, that he's been struggling in ways she never knew about. She tells him that she doesn't judge him, that she doesn't blame him, that she certainly doesn't pity him. She tells him that she sees him as a brave person who's facing his trauma head-on, who's seeking help, who's trying to heal and move forward. She also tells him that she's angry, furious actually, at his father. She tells him that what his father did was unforgivable, that he deserves to face consequences for his actions, that she supports her husband in whatever legal action he decides to pursue. She tells him that she's going to stand by him through all of this, that she's going to be his advocate and his supporter, that she's going to help him fight for justice if that's what he wants. James the lawyer helps her husband understand that while there may be legal options available, the statute of limitations in their state is complicated, and it's possible that too much time has passed to file criminal charges. However, he explains that there might be options for civil action, for lawsuits that could result in financial compensation, even if criminal charges aren't possible. He explains that the primary purpose of any legal action would be to give her husband a sense of agency and control, to allow him to confront what happened to him through the legal system, to potentially prevent his father from doing this to anyone else. Her husband decides that he wants to pursue legal action, not necessarily because he believes he'll win or because he's expecting to get money from his father, but because he needs to have his trauma validated and acknowledged by the legal system, because he needs to stand up and say that what his father did was wrong, because he needs to take back some of the power that was stolen from him when he was 12 years old. His wife supports this decision completely, telling him that she believes in him, that she's proud of him for taking this step, that she's going to be with him every step of the way. The decision to pursue legal action is terrifying for him. He has nightmares for weeks about having to detail his abuse in court, about having to face his father across a courtroom, about the possibility of losing and having his trauma dismissed as not serious enough or not credible enough. He has panic attacks where he questions whether pursuing this is worth the emotional toll it's going to take on him. But his wife holds him through each panic attack, reminds him of why he decided to do this, talks him through the fear and the doubt. She also reaches out to a therapist who specializes in trauma and legal proceedings, someone who can help him prepare for the emotional aspects of going through the legal process. This therapist helps him understand that what he's feeling is normal, that many survivors experience doubt and fear when they're about to confront their abusers through the legal system, that it's okay to feel all of these conflicting emotions simultaneously. The therapist also helps him practice testifying, helps him develop coping strategies for managing his emotions while recounting traumatic events. His wife insists on attending every therapy session with his trauma specialist, every meeting with James the lawyer, every court proceeding. She wants him to know that he's not alone in this, that she believes him, that his trauma is real and valid and deserves to be addressed. She takes notes during the meetings, asks clarifying questions, advocates for her husband when he's too overwhelmed to advocate for himself. She becomes his biggest supporter and his strongest voice. The process of pursuing legal action is long and complicated and emotionally grueling. There are depositions where her husband has to detail his abuse in graphic terms to lawyers and court officials. There are psychological evaluations where he has to talk to psychologists about the trauma and its effects. There are moments where he breaks down, where he regrets starting the process, where he questions whether it's worth all the pain and stress. But his wife is there through all of it, holding his hand, telling him he's strong, reminding him of why he decided to pursue this. The first deposition is absolutely brutal. Her husband sits across from his father's lawyer and has to describe in excruciating detail what his father did to him, where it happened, how many times it happened, what he felt and thought and experienced. He has to describe things that he's barely been able to say out loud to his therapist, let alone to a stranger in a formal legal setting. He has to maintain his composure while recounting the most traumatic moments of his childhood. He has to watch as the lawyer takes notes, watches as expressions of doubt or skepticism potentially cross faces, watches as his trauma is being documented and questioned and analyzed from every possible angle. His wife sits in the waiting room during the entire deposition, waiting for him to finish, preparing herself to see him devastated and broken when he emerges. When he finally comes out of that room, he's pale and shaking and crying. She takes him to a private room and just holds him while he falls apart, while he questions whether he can do this, while he doubts whether pursuing justice is worth the emotional cost. She tells him that he's been so brave, that she's so proud of him, that what he just did took incredible courage. She tells him that it's okay to doubt, that it's okay to fall apart, that she's here to hold him together when he can't hold himself together. There are also depositions from his father's side, where his father's lawyer tries to discredit him, tries to suggest that his memory is faulty, tries to imply that he might be exaggerating or fabricating the abuse for financial gain or attention. It's brutal and dehumanizing, and it triggers all of her protective instincts. She has to physically hold herself back from standing up and defending her husband, from shouting that he's telling the truth, from defending his character and his credibility. She sits in the back of the room fuming, watching her husband be questioned and doubted and attacked, and it takes everything in her to remain silent and let the legal process unfold. During one particularly difficult moment, his father's lawyer implies that he wanted the abuse to happen, that he must have done something to encourage it, that perhaps he's misremembering events that were actually consensual interactions. The insinuation is so disgusting and so wrong that her husband stands up and tells the lawyer that he's a child when the abuse started, that there was nothing consensual about it, that nothing he could have done would have justified what his father did. He's shaking with rage and pain and betrayal as he says these words, and his wife stands up with him, putting her hand on his back in a gesture of solidarity and support. After that deposition, her husband sinks into a depression. He struggles with suicidal ideation again, struggles with the feelings of worthlessness and shame that the lawyer's insinuations triggered. His wife becomes hypervigilant, making sure he's taking his medication, making sure he's going to therapy, making sure he's not alone during the darkest moments. She reaches out to his therapist and tells them about the suicidal thoughts, and they increase his therapy sessions to multiple times per week. She takes time off work to be with him, to ensure his safety, to help him through this acute crisis. She also makes the decision to attend the support group for partners of trauma survivors. She needs her own community, her own people who understand what she's going through, people who can validate her own emotional experience of supporting someone through their trauma recovery. She meets women and men who have also stood by their partners through sexual abuse disclosures and legal proceedings and recovery journeys. She listens to their stories and realizes that what she's experiencing, the secondary trauma, the rage at the perpetrator, the fear for her partner's safety, the exhaustion of emotional labor, is real and valid and shared by others. One woman in the support group tells her that she needs to make sure she's taking care of herself, that she can't pour from an empty cup, that her husband's recovery journey is his responsibility, but her own emotional well-being is her responsibility. This hits her hard because she realizes that she's been so focused on supporting her husband that she's neglected her own needs. She hasn't been sleeping well, hasn't been exercising, hasn't been spending time with her own friends and family. She's been so consumed by his trauma that she's lost sight of her own life. During this time, her husband's therapy intensifies. He works with his therapist on processing specific traumatic memories, on developing coping strategies for his triggers, on learning to be more present and less dissociated. He works on rebuilding his relationship with his body, which has been a source of shame and disconnection for him for decades. He works on learning to trust people, to be vulnerable, to let people in. The therapy is exhausting and painful, but it's also transformative. He begins to heal in ways that he didn't think were possible. He also starts attending a support group for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. He's nervous at first, terrified of being judged or seen as weak for talking about his trauma in front of strangers. But he finds that the group is incredibly supportive and understanding, that there are people who have experienced similar things, that he's not alone in his suffering. He begins to open up more in the group, to share his story, to listen to other survivor stories, to realize that his trauma doesn't define him, that he's so much more than what happened to him. His wife attends one of the support group meetings as a partner, and she's struck by the strength and courage of the people in the room, by the way they support each other, by the realness of the conversations happening. She realizes that her husband has been carrying this burden alone for so long, and now he has a community of people who understand what he's going through. She also realizes that she's been given an opportunity to be part of his healing, to be someone he can depend on, to be someone who sees him and loves him fully, including the traumatized parts. The legal case takes over a year to resolve. During that time, her husband experiences ups and downs, moments of hope and moments of despair. But ultimately, the case settles. His father doesn't admit to the abuse, and he doesn't face criminal charges, but he does agree to a monetary settlement. The settlement isn't about the money for her husband. It's about validation. It's about his trauma being acknowledged, even if his father won't explicitly admit to it. It's about him taking back some of the power that was taken from him. When the settlement is finalized, her husband sits down with his wife and cries again, but these are different tears. These are tears of relief, of release, of the beginning of healing. He tells her that he couldn't have done this without her, that her support and belief in him gave him the strength to face his trauma and pursue justice. He tells her that he's grateful for her, that he loves her, that having her by his side has made all the difference. She tells him that she's so proud of him, that watching him face his trauma and come out the other side has been one of the most profound experiences of her life. She tells him that she loves him deeply, not despite his trauma but including it, because his trauma is part of his story and his story is part of who he is. She tells him that she's honored to be by his side, that she's committed to supporting him through his ongoing healing, that she's grateful that he trusted her enough to tell her, even if it took him a while to get there. Over the following months and years, her husband continues his therapy and his support group attendance, continues working on his healing and processing his trauma. He begins to experience periods of time where he's not constantly triggered, where he can go through a day without intrusive thoughts about his abuse, where he can feel more present and more alive. The progress isn't linear. There are setbacks and difficult moments, but overall, he's moving in a positive direction. Their marriage also continues to evolve and deepen as a result of going through this crisis together. They learn new ways of communicating, new ways of supporting each other, new ways of being intimate both emotionally and physically. Her husband works with his therapist on being able to be physically intimate without triggering his trauma, and their sex life slowly becomes healthier and more connected. They learn to talk about his triggers and his needs, and she learns how to support him when he's having a difficult moment. She also begins to understand why he was deleting his messages. It wasn't about infidelity or betrayal. It was about him trying to keep his trauma private while he figured out how to deal with it. She realizes that the secretive behavior was actually a form of self-protection, that he was trying to maintain control over his narrative and his trauma while he processed it. She realizes that while his method of dealing with the situation wasn't ideal, his motivations came from a place of trying to protect himself, and she can understand that now. She also recognizes that her own reaction to discovering his secret, the investigation, the following him, the confrontation, came from a place of fear and suspicion based on her own insecurities and assumptions. She realizes that she made some assumptions about his behavior without having complete information, that she violated his privacy in ways that weren't okay, even though her intentions came from a place of care and concern for their relationship. She works on this in her own therapy, learning to communicate her fears and concerns directly rather than acting on assumptions. They both realize that the message deletion, while initially suspicious, was actually a turning point in their relationship. The confrontation that came from her discovery of his secret keeping led to the revelation of his trauma, which led to him getting help, which led to him pursuing justice, which led to him beginning to heal. They realize that sometimes the things that look like problems on the surface are actually pathways to deeper healing and more authentic connection. Years later, her husband is in a much better place. He still attends his support group, still goes to therapy regularly, still has difficult moments related to his trauma. But he's no longer defined by his trauma. He's a survivor who's integrated his past into his present in a healthy way. He's present in his marriage in ways he never was before. He's able to be intimate without fear. He's able to communicate openly about his struggles. He's able to receive love and support from his wife without shame or embarrassment. Her husband tells her one day that if she hadn't followed him to that coffee shop meeting, if she hadn't confronted him about the message deletion, he would probably still be keeping his trauma secret. He tells her that her willingness to push for truth, even though it came from a place of suspicion, ended up being one of the most important things that's ever happened to him. He tells her that her insistence on honesty and transparency in their relationship forced him to face something he's been avoiding for decades, and that facing it has saved his life in more ways than one. She tells him that she's grateful they found their way through that crisis, grateful that her suspicions led to something so meaningful, grateful that she was able to be there for him when he finally told her the truth. She tells him that loving him through his healing has been a privilege, that supporting him through his journey toward justice and recovery has strengthened her own character and her own understanding of what love really means. She thinks back to that day when she first noticed him deleting his messages, when she felt that stab of suspicion and hurt, when she thought he was having an affair or keeping secrets because he didn't love her anymore. She realizes that the universe had a different plan, that the crisis she thought was the beginning of the end was actually the beginning of the deepest healing her marriage would ever experience. She realizes that sometimes the things we're most afraid of, the moments we think will break us, are actually the moments that will make us stronger. And when she watches her husband now, healed and present and alive in ways he never was before, she understands that all of it, the suspicion, the investigation, the confrontation, the revelation, the healing, was necessary. She understands that sometimes love requires us to push past our comfort zones, to ask difficult questions, to insist on honesty even when it's scary. She understands that her willingness to not accept the easy explanations, to dig deeper, to pursue the truth, ultimately saved her marriage and, more importantly, saved her husband's life and allowed him to become the person he was always meant to be.